morning instead of Wednesday. Thank you for your flexibility with our shift this morning in professional development. So as I shared with you in the beginning of the year, our emphasis for instruction this year is really looking at strategies to engage students in discussion and inquiry and debate in any way possible that we can get our students talking and sharing the learning that's happening in the classroom. So when we knew that this was going to be a focus this year, we knew we had to ask the expert in the field. So I'm really proud to introduce to you Dr. John Pollard. He is the Associate Dean of the Honors College at the University of Arizona. Thank you.
First of all, I'm standing here because I'm being filmed. It's a little bit awkward to be so set back, so I apologize for that kind of thing. Thank you. It's really an honor and a privilege to come work with my colleagues here at UHS. I'm a professor in the Biochem department at the University of Arizona, as well as Assistant Dean at the Honors College for Academics. And we have a lot in common in the sense that many of your students end up in my classroom, and many of your students who have taken you for different classes will be in my classroom next Monday. I'll be teaching an honors general chemistry course with about 96 students. I'm sure over the past couple years, I've had many of your students, so we have a commonality there. What I want to do today, though, is I want to sort of talk to you about a movement that's going on in higher ed right now that I think you should be familiar with respect to what we call evidence-based instructional practices. There's a big shift occurring, and in particular in STEM, but this is also impacting the humanities, of what we do when we gather students together in the classroom. And this wave is really mounting across the country, and if you have students who go to the University of Arizona or to any other college across this country, they are going to be exposed to a much different learning environment than we were when we were at the university. This change has happened over the past decade, and so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about this, in particular what I do at the University of Arizona as related to this, and hopefully give you some insights on how to think about this possibly with your students in your classroom. I want to start off by asking a question, though. And the question is very simple. I'm going to ask you to sort of engage with the people sitting at your table. I'm going to give you 2 minutes to think about this, and then maybe we'll take a volunteer, or I'll pick somebody randomly. We'll do it like that, maybe, to report out to the group what their thought is. And here's the question I want you to reflect on. Can you recall an instance in your life where you learned something? And I'm not talking about, oh, I took a class and over a semester I learned something. I'm talking about a particular moment in time where you had a learning experience, you learned something. And then the second part of that question is, what evidence can you present to support your claim? Okay, I'm going to give you 2 minutes, and then I'll look forward to hearing from someone in the room. So go ahead, talk with someone around you. 2 minutes, go.
Every time I change my tire on my bike, I get another flat. I couldn't figure it out. It was getting really frustrating because it was like every time I was like, what's wrong? Was it a bad tube or something? And what I realized was, like, one time I had changed my tire. It was like this little bolt with a screw on there. And then I have this thing that auto-inflates it. And so you just like push it over and it's a CO2 cartridge. And I hadn't screwed that thing hard enough, and so like when I pushed it on, the thing popped off. So after that, I would do screw that thing all the way up first, thinking that that was a better way to do it. And what I was really doing was like screwing that all the way up the first time, I was like pinch it and press it. And so I put the air in it, like distort it, and then like that would be a weak spot in the tube. And so,
okay, 1 minute.
Sometime I realized, oh, I'm not screw that thing all the way in tight first. You have to put it hard enough, but then it's really you have to like do it. I know I learned something, but I don't think it's flat every time I take the side.
That's a good one. Most of my learning deals with some kind of trauma. And so I learned that it's a really bad idea to walk up or down the stairs with your hands in your pockets.
Okay, do I have a volunteer? Someone who would like to share this? Volunteer, somebody. Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
Amy.
Amy. Well, go ahead.
When I was a small child, my father challenged me to remove the training wheels off of my bike. And I did, and he pushed me down a hill, which apparently is not child abuse in the 80s. And I very quickly learned how to ride a bike, and to this day, I don't have training wheels on my bike.
And there's your evidence. Excellent. Very nice. That's a good one. What's another one? Somebody else want to share? Yes, in the back.
It was similar, but when I learned how to drive a stick shift, when I learned how to drive a car.
Yeah. Did you ever have that gear grinding moment? Yeah. Yeah. How about one more? Anyone else have something? So, how about anyone else have something from an academic experience? Anybody? Yeah, in the back.
So I, in one of my grad classes at the UVA for art history, it was a class called Mapping America, and it was about how you conceive of landscapes, how you conceive of space, how you conceive of identity. And then later, after I'd taken the course, my husband and I were on a road trip, and we were driving through New Mexico, which has nothing in it. And we were talking about this class I had taken called Mapping America, and so we were applying what I learned in that class, and I just talked about so much, even my husband knew all about the class, so. Yeah.
Great. So that's more of a sort of an applied experience with it, right?
Yeah.
And sort of feeding that information out in a contextualized environment. Well, I can tell you, I've talked across the country. I've asked this question of a room of full professors at Caltech. I've done it at Ivy League schools. I've done it at high schools. I've done it at community colleges. And every single time, no matter what the group is, and I ask this question, I get the same type of answer. Every time the answer is the person is engaged in the process. Okay? The person is either doing something and having to engage with it and struggle and possibly fail a little bit but engage in it, or it's experiential in a way. Never once have I ever had someone say to me, someone talked to me and explained something and I learned it. Never. As humans, that we just do not associate that with the act of learning on the moment. Now, I want to preface this by saying that I'm not saying that delivering information in a lecture format cannot be a valuable tool. But I will tell you that the evidence now mounting shows us that this is not how we learn. We know this from neuroscience. We know this from cognitive behavioral sciences and the learning sciences, that learning is an engaged process. There's a misconception that often people have, educators have, and students have this too. Just tell me what I need to know, as if I could screw your head open and just pour the info in, or the more modern version would be I just Wi-Fi it to you, and you just learn. And this is just not how the brain works. And we know learning is a process, and in the learning sciences, by the way, in the learning research area, this is an odd quote that's become sort of infamous by, you remember Don Rumsfeld? Remember that? Yeah, remember Donald Rumsfeld? So it's actually nothing related to what Donald Rumsfeld's known for, but he had this very famous quote from the Iraq War, the beginning of the Iraq War in the early 90s. The quote was essentially, there are known knowns, there are things that we know, and there are known unknowns. That's to say, things that we know we don't, or we know we don't know. And then there are unknown unknowns, things that we don't know that we don't know. What's the combo he left out? There's one he left out.
Unknown knowns.
Yeah, things you don't know that you know, okay? Well, things that you don't know could be things like misconceptions you have, or implicit biases that you carry, things that you don't know that you know. And so I would say that learning is transforming unknown unknowns and unknown knowns, things you don't know that you don't know, and things you don't know you know, through a process to make them known knowns. And the one thing that we don't value as much, I feel, in education is having students recognize knowing what they don't know. We oftentimes bias ourselves about knowing stuff and knowing what you know, but also knowing what you do not know is an important thing. So this is learning. And this process is what I'm going to focus on talking a little bit about today in the context of the classroom. Here's a picture of a university classroom, it's a 13th century Italian university, and it's really interesting to see how things have not changed. For example, you've got the sleeping student in the back, you've got like, you know, the superintendent one who sits in front, who's like this, you know, you're just like, please don't raise your hand anymore, I know you know everything. And you've got the distracted students in the back with the, you know, ancient and medieval cell phones, right? That we deal with. And then now and here's what we see when we come to university. We have all these students coming in now, and these students are now paying. It's no longer required. They're paying to come do this. Just stare at you, being me, as I'm some apparition up front. And we've got you, and this was the modality of instruction at the university level when I was in college. You went to a classroom and you sat and just listened and you just wrote. And that was it, right? And all the classes were like this. And when I first started teaching 18 years ago, that was my modality. It was chalkboards. I would go there. And I remember looking out and just seeing people just stare at me writing and being on the other side of it thinking, what am I doing here? What is going on? The classic quote is, you know, notes go, you know, there's no brain involved, you know, there's no cognitive thing, it's just like pure information transfer. So this is sort of where we're at, and I'm not going to explain these graphs, but if you want to get up to speed quickly on where evidence-based instructional practice research is in higher ed, there's a very famous paper. It's a PNAS paper. All you have to do is Google Freeman PNAS paper, and you will find the link to this paper. It's the line in the sand that was drawn in 2014. It was a meta-analysis looking at almost 300 different research studies across the country. What this paper showed was that there is strong, compelling evidence to support that moving away from a single modality instructional lecturing, to an active teaching modality, multimodality approach, improves learning, retention, improves DEW rates, which is something we care about very much at the university level. And this has a more dramatic impact on women, on lower socioeconomic class, on a number of other variables where retention rates in STEM, for example, are problematic. When this paper was published, Freeman famously said that if this was a pharmaceutical drug trial, you would have to call it off on ethical reasons. Because to lecture to students in the college classroom is essentially unethical at this point with respect to learning. This is where it's at now, and this is now transformed what we do in higher ed, or it's causing a revolution. And it's interesting to work with some of my colleagues, for example, in the sciences who are evidence-based practitioners who still run on belief systems of their own beliefs of how learning occurs, their own misconceptions. And the problem is, as humans, we build our own ideas about how things occur for us based on what we perceive was our experiences. So I went through a lecture course. I'm fine. Look at me. I'm a college professor. What's the problem? You know, well, there's a lot of problems with that. People become teachers at UHS or college professors. You would have got here if you would have had your classes in Chinese. Okay, you would have succeeded very likely because you owned your own learning. But the standard students we get at the University of Arizona, even our best students, even the students we get from schools like this, are different in many ways. And especially this generation has got a lot of differences about how they perceive learning and engage in the learning process. So I want to talk a little bit more about that. One of the strategies that I use in the classroom, and I do this with large classes, I'm going to show you some pictures here soon. My classes will be 300 students, okay? Is what's called the learning cycle. The learning cycle is a very simple strategy that you can use in your classroom. And basically, this is how it goes. Imagine I present to you a question first, and I ask you to get together and think about that question. Well, I kind of did that at the beginning here, right? And what I'm doing there is I establish a need to know with you. In other words, I'm not interested per se in you getting the answer to that question. I want you to start thinking about things, okay? And I want to get you sort of interested and plugged in to what I'm going to explore with you. At that moment in my chemistry class, I may ask them something, show them something. What would you predict will happen here? Or how would you explain this? And just get some thinking out from them. And then I'll say, okay, those are all good thoughts. Let's start to explore this a little bit. And then I'll give a short lecture. That lecture might be 5 minutes or so, max 7 minutes. And then from there, what I will do is I'll start to cycle them through by asking them to work in groups on questions related to the content I'm working on. And I'm leveraging what we know about the value of collaborative learning. So I'm going to ask them to work in groups of 2 or 4. Sometimes I'll ask them to work by themselves as well, and then report out. And then I will cycle them through this. Sometimes this is on a short cycle. Sometimes this cycle is longer. But the learning cycle is a very basic technique that I use in my curriculum. And again, I do this with large groups of students. This is a picture of the classroom that I've taught in at the University of Arizona. You can see me right there in the center. My students all have laptop computers here. They're working on a molecular dynamics simulation we built to understand some fundamental ideas about light-matter interactions. And you can see I have undergraduates who are walking around. Those are class preceptors. Those are students who took my course and now come back and help me out as what we call learning assistants. And we're engaging the students in groups. But the problem here that we ran into at the University of Arizona is that room is horrible for this. That room is for watching movies or performances or something. And we made a big push about 3 years ago. We went to the vice provost's office almost in protest as faculty and said, we cannot, if you want us to engage students in evidence-based instruction, you got to get us better space in this. This is lame. And so we, to make a long story short, we did a pilot in our science and engineering library. It was a periodicals room. It's got these pillars. We could fit about 260 students in there. We literally set up graduation banquet tables, like plastic tables and chairs. Just got monitors from across campus. And on the cheap, we set this up and ran a pilot study. We saw a lot of positive results from this in engagement, in our ability to manage the students in the classroom. And so now we have almost 30 of these rooms on campus, ranging from the size of holding about 300 students down to about 20-something students. We've had close to 15,000 students have classes in these types of rooms. And for sure, if you have a student who comes to the U of A, they're going to experience classes in these types of rooms. It's basically a room like this, with screens on all the walls. That's going to be their classroom experience, okay? And they're going to be working collaboratively with each other. Here's another room that I work in. That's the room, if you have I've had a number of UH students in that room. It's one of our premier collaborative learning spaces. You can see I can sit down, and I often do when my students are working. I sit at the table with them and work with them in that way. It's such a powerful way to engage your students. Kind of takes down the barrier of, kind of standing over them in a certain way. And I have a lot of, again, learning assistants that help me with this. I go in with a team. And this is, again, a picture of my honors general chemistry course, which I'll be teaching again this fall. And there's a huge mound of research building to support how important these types of spaces are for learning. Space matters. We know this. It changes human behavior. You get people in a different space, and it changes the way they behave intellectually and even physically. One of the most powerful low-tech tools that I would highly recommend, I don't know if Amy even has access to these or not, but these cheap whiteboards. If you want to engage your students in the classroom, nothing is more powerful than just handing out whiteboards and having them work in groups. we sort of discovered this just because we had these when we got this furniture and we started asking students to work on them. And I can tell you, I mean, a lot of people will use clickers in the classroom or technology, and that's great, and I do use some of that stuff, but I will take whiteboards over that technology any day. There's something about the non-committal aspect of a whiteboard that makes it easy to work with somebody. Because if you don't like what you wrote down, you can just erase it super quick. It's easy to see. It's also easy to show to other people. When students are working on stuff, when I'm walking around, I can see everyone's work. It's a very powerful thing. So if you want to engage students, that tool I would highly recommend. You can get the cheap ones at Home Depot. Really, they're just powerful tools. One thing that also that I want as part of my work and my research is the implementation of what we call 80-20 group testing. Many of your students are going to experience this as well. How this works is in my chemistry class, students will, when we have an exam or a quiz, they will start by taking the quiz by themselves. And so let's say I have the curriculum that I teach at the University of Arizona is called Chemical Thinking. We have thematic exams, and so students will come in, they'll take the test by themselves. And then after they're done taking that test, they'll get into their active learning groups, and they'll retake a part of that, not the whole test, some people do this with the whole test, a part of that test as a group. The grade they get on the exam is comprises of 80% of their individual and 20% of their group. But you know this, because you have UHS students, that you have to make the deal, if you do this, that the group can't take your grade down, or it's going to become Lord of the Flies. Okay, so you can't, it has to be all good with working with the group. This has been a great way to engage students, and this is a video, and it's kind of hard to see. This is actually a bunch of students here. And I don't even know if it'll work. Yeah, well, this is them taking a test. And now some of them are distracted looking at me. Maybe I'll recognize some of these students. But they're actually taking a test right there. That's the 20% part. And I can tell you, watching these students collaborate together, this is a pretty good mood for taking a chemistry test, right? I have a graduate student who's doing her PhD dissertation trying to understand how information gets transferred under these settings within the chemistry curriculum that I co-authored and we work on here. All right, I got a question for you. I've asked this question to about 2,000 incoming U of A students over the past 2 years. Many of them have been your students. I want to see if you can predict what you think their answer is. I asked them, and I do a poll. I asked them, how do you think best describes your students moving to university with respect to their study practices? What do you think they say their study practices are moving ahead? I'll give you 30 seconds to make a prediction, and then we'll see what you think. What does somebody think? If you had to predict in the back. Well, I'm sorry, what was that? C? Mostly crammed. Okay. Somebody else? Yeah.
The gospel I preach is B.
Study every night. That's the one you want. You want that one, right? Yeah, I have some bad news for you. Yeah.
I agree with C, first of all, but I think that there are a lot of D's in there because they talk a lot to each other when they're stuck. And I see that even before school when kids are already coming in my classroom and they're sitting and there's about 3 of them going, but how did you, and they're talking together. I think there is some of that going on.
Yeah. I mean, there's definitely some of all of this in some sense, right? So I don't want to generalize too much here. But I'm just going to tell you the truth of when I ask this question. And I've done this in a room of 200 students, honors students. These are students who admitted to the Honors College at the U of A. And the answer overwhelmingly, will be C. And And the next closest answer by far is A. In fact, if I ask how many people, basically it's split. In fact, they want to answer both. It's a hybrid of those two. They cram, they really don't study, but when they have to, they cram. That's it. And this is a big problem we have when students come to the University of Arizona, because the level jump of content and the pace that content comes catches many students off guard. And as humans, we operate on what works for us. And I tell students all the time, hey, I'm a scientist. Go ahead, do the experiment, cram, and just let the results play out. And I've had students with 5.3 GPAs in high school. I don't know how you get these GPAs anymore. Amy, how do you get a 5.3 GPA anymore? It's like, I thought it was 4. Anyway, so all these students who come in with amazing GPAs, all of these AP credits, AP 5 on this, AP 4 on this, and then they get a 44 on the first exam in my chemistry course or in some class. And suddenly, it's like it's over for them. They freak out, all right? And they've never experienced that failure before. And I'm in a position where I have to sort of talk to them like, you're gonna be, okay, let's just take this step at a time. And inside, I never say this, I'm thinking, this is the best thing that could ever happen to you, was failure. It's the best thing that could ever happen. Because now you've got a taste of reality of what it means to be out in the world when you were in a classroom now with everyone's a valedictorian and everybody has got the 5.3 GPA, okay? And that experience is powerful for them. One of the things that I want to talk to you about, and I mentioned this to Amy about this, if there's one book that I would highly recommend that you read, I'm going to recommend a second book here in a moment, but it's this book right here. It's called Make It Stick. This book summarizes what we know in a case-based approach about the science of learning. And we have developed a number of faculty learning communities at the University of Arizona where faculty now are reading this book and realizing that engaging your students in active evidence-based instructional practices is based on how we know we learn. And so this is a good way to sort of realize that these practices are not just trendy or fad, they're based on how the brain works. We've actually created a program at the University of Arizona called SAIL, Student Advocates for Improved Learning. These students read this book, and then they implement these practices in their own studies, and then they go out and do workshops for other students on campus, which has been a very powerful thing. Nothing is more powerful than peer-to-peer learning with this. I can go up in front of students and talk about this stuff until I'm blue in the face, but it's always more powerful when one of their peers says it to them and says, this works for me, this is a powerful way to learn. For example, we'll ask students what the best way to learn from a text is, and I've done this at orientations as well. So what do you think students say here? If you ask them. I think we all kind of know, I'm sure your gut tells you right away that what the answer should be is C. That's what the science shows you, right? But students, B is a very popular answer. And it's a misconception, it's like I say to students, oh yeah, you have the pink highlighter and then the green one. Oh, you've been using that one too much, it switched colors. And like thinking that the highlighter is some sort of conduit of flow, through the arm up, right, that you learn. Of course, highlighting is an organizational method. That's great, but that's not a learning method, right? That's just a way to organize stuff. And so it's things like this that we work with students about. How do you actually learn from reading a text? This is just one example. So here, I just want to run very briefly through some of the principles in Make It Stick. And again, I highly advise you read this. For example, the book talks about retrieval practice. Retrieval practice, of course, is when you know that sensation when you have a password that we have to memorize all these passwords these days, right? And you go to something and you haven't used that password for a while, and you're like, oh, it's, and maybe you try and then you guess it right, like, oh, yeah, yes, that was about to cause me 45 minutes of pain and suffering, right? I got it. You remember it better then, okay? Because you were just on the precipice of sort of forgetting. We know from research that if you can do retrieval practice, in other words, you study for a material for a while and then you take a little break from it, and then you come back to it when it's starting to decay a little bit, that helps to bolster your long-term memory. And we work with students about how to implement retrieval practice into their studies. This is just a study compared to things like concept mapping or repeated studying or just a one-off cram. This is always tends to be a superior way to retain knowledge. Along with that is what's called interleaving. Because students have multiple courses they're taking, interleaving means that how you're going to you're going to space your practice out. So you're going to study something for a little while, shorter period of time, then you're going to take a break and do something else, then something else, and then you're going to come back to that original thing. And it's that interleaving of the different diverse content that you're exploring intellectually is another powerful way to enhance learning, as opposed to just focusing on one thing and just driving that thing home. But that's all you do.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So the difference between retrieving is study something and then take a break, like go watch TV or walk the dog, and then go back to it, and then interleaving is study math, study history, go back to math.
Yeah, and so yeah, exactly. I mean, but I wouldn't say that the definition of, they're both kind of the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's not so concrete like that. Like one is just saying how you would approach one topic. One is talking about how when you have multiple things that you're learning, and that's really what interleaving is. Okay.
So a variety of classes that you're trying to study for a test on the same day.
That's right. And that's the typical experience for a UA student. They have multiple things they're managing, okay? And so how do you sort of manage those multiple things? By interleaving them in your study practice.
But aren't
Yeah.
you also talking about how we deliver content? Like introduce a concept, move on to another concept, return to the original.
Absolutely, and this is a great point. From an instructional perspective, interleaving becomes an important thing, and you know this. When let's say that you introduce an idea and your students explore it, then you come back to that and return to that and integrate it into new material maybe a week or two later. That's a great way for them to they have to come back and you've done this, right, with your students. You come back to something that you did 2 weeks later and it seems like they forgot everything. I do this in my class, like remember we did this? You know, they're just staring at you, sort of thing. So interleaving is the practice of continually bringing stuff back as well over a semester. I thank you for pointing that out. The book talks a lot about this, and I really don't have to say much about this, about embracing difficulties. This is a huge thing at the university, is how do you get a student who's 18 or 19 or 20 to be able to show some grit and endure knowing that learning is hard. One of the things, when you put students into an active learning classroom, and you ask them to engage, you will get pushback from students. And the pushback is classic. Can you just tell me what I need to know? Can you just tell me? Because this, and really what they're saying, this is hard. You're asking me to think right now, and I'm struggling, and this is hard. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's called learning. That's what learning is. It's a messy process. Learning is not this. So if you plot learning versus time in your life on a topic, it doesn't look like this, right? It kind of goes like this, right? It's got this sort of thing. And sort of a best fit line might be an upward trajectory, but the slope is like this, and it's messy. So embracing difficulties is something Makestick talks about. This is a big problem. There's a very famous study called the Dunning-Kruger effect. I don't know if you've heard of this. Basically what it says, the summary of it, is that the less you know about something, the worse you are at predicting how much you know about that thing. And the more you know about something, okay, let's talk. So what I just described was student. Now I'm going to describe you, teacher. The more you know about something, the worse you are at predicting how much someone else knows about what you know about. So it's a perfect storm. College professor, student, right? Doesn't know how to predict what they know, doesn't know how to predict what this person knows, this person writes a test for this person, okay? So, this is a classic study. 93% of people think they're really good drivers, right? Everyone thinks they're good. This is the most common question and statements I hear over 18 years of teaching. I can see this coming like I have some sort of psychic power A student will come to my office hours and they start to talk, and I almost can fill in the language. If I understand everything you've taught, will I do well on the test? I'm like, where is this question coming from? You know? Where do I start with that, right? What that student is saying is looking for security. Like, just tell me I'm going to do okay. Just make me feel good. Or this one, after the exam. I knew everything going to this test. I was teaching my friends, and they all got A's on the test, and I got a D. What's going on? What that student is saying is, I've done everything. This is your fault. Not me, because I was teaching everybody. They all got A's because of me. Now, what's the problem you've created for me? That's what that is. And that's also sort of an illusion of knowing. There's a misconception out there that you are a visual learner or an auditory learner or a kinesthetic learner. There's no evidence to support these claims, okay? You are all of those. You are all of those, and you might have a bias towards one or other, but that bias has no connection to your ability to learn. So with students, I'm more of a visual learner. Yeah, so yeah, okay. But you're also an audio learner. You're a learner, all right. So these tend to be. It's really what matters is one's prior knowledge, their fluency in language, their determination. These are the factors that influence how you learn, not the type of learner you are. And of course, this is again talking about grit and having what's called a growth mindset, something we preach a lot at the University of Arizona. I'm sure you've heard about this. Students come in, it's very noticeable right at the beginning that they have a fixed versus growth mindset, and it's something that was also talked about in this book. There's another book, by the way, that's a great book written by an English professor, James Lang. It's called Small Teaching. That book right there is a great book to read as a teacher because it gives you specific strategies on how to engage your students in the classroom using evidence-based instructional practice. He teaches at a small liberal arts school, so his classroom experience is very much like yours, not like mine with the 300 students. And so I would recommend, if there are two books that you could read, those would be two. And we formed that top picture there is faculty learning communities. Those are faculty at the University of Arizona who have read these books, who are talking about how to implement those ideas into their classroom. And then, of course, how that relates to what we do with our students. One final thing I want to mention. There's some big changes coming at the University of Arizona. I'm tagging this on the end with respect to general education. There is a shifting philosophical revolution going on across the country about what the meaning and value of gen ed is. People are frustrated because I just had a group of about this many U of A students at a workshop last week who are seniors, juniors, freshmen, sophomores. I asked them, could someone here tell me why you think you're being asked to take a general education course here at the University of Arizona? Not one answer. Nobody can tell me why they're taking these courses. Nobody can tell me how those courses. There's a young woman who's an Eller business major who stood up and said, I don't understand why I have to take this Greek mythology course. I'm a business and marketing person. Why do I have to study this? I mean, I fell over in my chair, you know? First of all, to not understand the connection between marketing and myths, and I mean, where do I start with this one, right? I mean, it's just, but obviously we're not doing a good job at helping students integrate these types of ideas and notions into their major programs. One of the projects I'm working on at the UVA Honors College is developing a new set of general education courses called Big Ideas courses. So instead of having the course be topical, we're having the course be centered on a big idea or a grand challenge. And we're hoping to have students develop an interdisciplinary perspective on that idea. So imagine you have a scientist, a social scientist, and a humanist teach the same course, different sections, and they look at a big idea. Let's say the big idea would be humans, data, and machines. And by the way, I'm bringing two world-renowned computer scientists to give lectures to students here at UHS this fall, and then also a world-renowned scholar in digital humanities. Just saying, look for that. It's going to be awesome. But imagine now you look at a topic from all those perspectives, then you have students come together and work together in collaborative learning spaces to develop ideas around that. So we're starting to move general education to more of this kind of experience, where they are able to draw connections between how you think critically or how you develop interdisciplinary reasoning, and how that relates to your major study, and also integrating other disciplines into your sort of perspective in life. Well, that's all I wanted to say. I teach chemistry. I like to mountain bike too, so I always like to put pictures up there of me out in the desert. Again, there's my email. You can email me anytime if you have any questions about anything related to the Honors College at the University of Arizona. By the way, I want to tell you that there's some really exciting things going on at the Honors College. We have all new leadership, myself being new there, our new dean, Terry Hunt, who's a world-renowned archaeologist. He's the guy who figured out how they move the statues on Easter Island. And then Melissa Fitch, our new associate dean, who's also this digital humanities expert who I'll be bringing to speak here. We have our new building that's coming in a year. We're revamping a lot of the curricular experiences. I'm pretty confident in a couple years that people won't even know how to spell Barrett, because they'll just want to come to the University of Arizona Honors College. We're really...
Can you talk really quick about the TED Talk lectures coming up?
Yes, that's what I was mentioning. So there are 3 talks. I would call these like TED Talk lectures. I'm bringing Mihai Surdano, I now pronounce his last name, Stephen Kruger, and Melissa Fitch. Stephen and Mihai are professors in the computer science department, and they're going to be talking about how data is linking humans and machines, and how we're moving into what we would call this 4th industrial revolution. They're going to be giving 2 talks here based on that. They gave these talks, they're TED Talk style talks, at the College of Science lecture series last spring. And so they're going to be giving those talks here. And then they're rounded off at the end in November. That's going to be in September, October. In November, Melissa Fitch, a distinguished professor, is going to be talking about how a lot of this idea relates to the humanities and to culture as well. She's a distinguished professor in Spanish and Portuguese. So that's going to be the theme for this fall. And then I'm going to bring some more speakers out from the College of Science lecture series this spring, again, to give some more talks here at UHS. These are going to be really exciting, world-renowned scholars coming to your school. Also, just one other thing I want to mention, we're planning an event to bring the entire senior class of UHS to campus on, I think, September 14th. We're in the process of planning that. We're planning a fun event for them. The Honors College is going to host them over there. We just want to get them on campus. It's about getting them excited, getting on a university campus, starting to visualize what this is going to be like. I know many of them will come to UVA and the UVA Honors College, some are not, doesn't matter. It's about sort of having them come to our beautiful campus and have an experience for a morning. Okay, and by the way, yeah, I already mentioned that I teach Honors Gen Chem. So thanks everybody, and I'd be happy to answer any questions, yeah. Yeah.
I have a question about how much homework you have the kids doing outside. I teach social studies courses, and so I'm just wondering how much of it are the kids have to come to class prepared. Like, we already gone over this information, so now we can work with it. Just about how I would get my kids to actually be outside.
Yeah, this is a really important point. So if you want to engage students in thinking in class, you're always going to be better if you can get them as prepped for that. One of the practices we use a lot is we don't ask them to do a ton of prep. We will have a short quiz, and we do a lot of our quizzing online. So we have online systems. We'll all have a 5-question quiz that they have to do before class. And the quiz is not hard. It's easy. But it's just that I just sort of want them to read 5 pages or so, and I want them to be primed on some things so they don't come totally cold. So I don't have a lot of a heavy requirement there, but as the semester starts to go on, then that starts to naturally sort of ramp up a little bit, that the expectations that they have to have read to this, and they have to have done this homework. I'm a big believer in, at least at the university level, what we do is it's kind of constant work, but not super heavy, but it's just constant. And frequent quizzing is a very powerful practice that if you don't use in your classroom, I would highly recommend you use. Keep students on their toes, but I do keep them sort of churning along. But of course, I don't know, maybe or maybe not. I know that I've had students come from UHS and say, wow, we have a lot of homework there, right? Or basis, we have a ton of homework, and that's great. And but we do, as I start to ramp them up, I start to ask my students to just do more and more and more and more. Yeah, in the back.
I have a quick question. So I love the idea of engaging students and getting them and also discussion questions out and try to get the students more engaged in class. But one thing, I'm sure I'm not alone in this, one thing I feel pressure from is from the College Board and the curriculum that I have to teach them, because then by May they get to that test, and if we've taken time to do a lot of group work or do a lot of discussion, kind of just veer off that typical College Board path of the curriculum, then they're looking at me, why did we, that was great at the time, but why did I get a 3 instead of a 5? Because we could have been reviewing. I had to teach them 3 types of essays. I had to teach them, those multiple choice strategies. And so I love this idea, and I want to implement it, but it's just, I feel like there's a lot of pressure from the College Board that you have to teach all of this, you have to teach them these strategies, or else they're not going to do well.
Couple comments. This is a great question. This is the most common question I get when I talk across the country, by far, from college, everyone. This is the question. And really, there's a couple answers here that's different for you guys being in high school than maybe at college, because usually my answer starts off with, because college professors say, well, I can't cover enough material if I do this. And my response has always been, what do you mean? What does cover mean? What does that actually mean? Let's get right down to it. What does it mean? And really what it means for them often is that they said it. So they said something, or they wrote something down, right? Or they somehow gave information to them. But it has nothing to do with whether or not they learn the stuff. So basically, really, if you really think about it, what you're saying is you are giving them all this information, and when it comes to those AP exams, it's on them. They're going to have to sort of shore up and get that done. Now, but that pressure is super real. I'm a believer, though, that you don't have to, you can still do as much, but you have to pick the things that you value, where you want to engage students in. In other words, if you're spending time in your classroom writing stuff on a board, or providing stuff that is sort of descriptive information, like the lowest level of Bloom's, and you're spending time on that in your classroom, that can be offloaded to them. Like, you need to know these things, okay? And I'm going to give you a quiz on these terms or something this Friday. And I may say something about this, but I'm not going to, spend my time saying this stuff out loud to you in the classroom. When we get to class, you're going to have to know the stuff for Wednesday or Friday. And I'm more interested in how you integrate these ideas, or how you apply these ideas. Now, this is different for different topics, but this is a real challenge. My recommendation, my suggestion though, is to pick something that you know first off. Just dip your feet in. Pick something you know first off that is more critical thinking based for your students. And take a week, just a week, and try to engage your students in the classroom with that, knowing that it would be the same in the end. You would cover the same if you either said it or you engaged them. Start there and start to see what the impact is on the students in your learning. I guarantee if you do that, you will very likely will start to open up and think, I could do more of this. Like, there's something to this, to engaging the students. Now, I want to make a comment about AP exams. My dream is to get rid of AP altogether. I want it completely gone, routed from the country, moved to Canada. I'm just kidding. I loathe these exams. Many of my colleagues do. The reason is now, for some reason, I have students coming in with 5s on these tests, and I don't understand how they get the 5. And this is in the sciences now. Now, I can't speak to many of the other disciplines. So I think it's a scam. And it's not you. or the teachers that's the problem. It's the AP board and all this kind of stuff. I don't like this. And there's going to start to be pushback against these exams. The universities, there's a tension building. And I'm going to predict in 10 years from now that this is going to be really a problem, that universities are going to start to say, we're not accepting that. And as soon as they start to say, we're not accepting this and not accepting that, it's going to devalue those things, where you can actually really work with your students without this pressure to take this test. That's just my opinion. Yes, sir.
One of the things that you talked about earlier was sort of that two-stage exam, the 80-20 split.
Yeah.
And I just want to let you guys know I've done that with zip grade. So if you're interested in doing it, I've got ideas I can definitely help out with that. And it's like, I heard somebody say it's like think, pair, share on steroids.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It's fantastic. And our kids really do respond well to it. So if you're interested, definitely come see me or let me know and I'll help you with it.
That's great to hear. Yeah.
Okay, so I totally appreciate these active learning strategies, and I think a lot of us use them, do the things that we presented. But the thing that worries me a little bit, that I wonder about, is lumping lecture off as this just completely separate entity. And I do agree, like micro-lecturing, short lecturing, and then gradually releasing responsibility to students is a good way to go. But I feel like we're sort of lumping lecture over here and active learning over here without much discussion about how to make lecturing more active. I mean, you just lectured us for 45 minutes, and I feel like I learned something. So this idea of a mouthpiece in front of students, and that's not learning for them. I think there are ways to lecture that can be personalized to students and that can bring students in and include them. And I think that you made some of those moves this morning. And so I just wish there were more attention paid to ways to lecture well and not to, I mean, the worst thing is bad lecturing. That's the worst thing for students. How do you do it in a way that is engaging?
And this is a great point. You know what's even worse than bad lecturing? Bad active learning in the classroom. Just because you get people around the table and ask them to work on something, that doesn't mean suddenly everyone starts learning and it's all good. I've seen horrible examples of this where I wanted to pull the fire alarm to just empty the room away. So you should just lecture. Absolutely, there can be an art to lecture. I think, though, what the message here, though, is not to devalue lecture, but rather, what is the... because I'm bringing TED Talk lectures to here. So there is something about listening to, and you can sort of get something from a dynamic lecture. For sure, I do it all the time, or I get stuff from lectures all the time. But the question is, what role does that modality have when you're meeting students 3 times a week for 15 weeks? That's when I start, and that's where the evidence shows that if that's you show up at the construction site with just a hammer, even though you are perfection with that hammer, that is where the research is showing that no matter how good you are, that for that course structure of meeting 3 times a week, like I do with my students, that is not even close to as effective as if I mix it up and I engage my students in the construction of knowledge. That's really what it is. Having said that, though, being exposed to lecture and and of course looking for ways in yourself when you do lecture to make that dynamic and deliverable to students, I think is an important craft of teaching. Absolutely. And also, I would say this. Lecture, if you have a lecture to students, a lot of times it's interesting to assess what your students got from the lecture, right? I had a discussion with some professors at Caltech about this, and I challenged these guys, and they did, to say, I'll tell you what, go up in front of your class, it's like a physics class, give them your absolute best lecture. I mean, it is the best one that you could give. And then right after that, give them a quiz on the content. And see what happens, right, when you do that. And it's so predictable. They're going to do horrible on the quiz. Because there's a certain kind of learning you can get from a lecture. But a deeper, more enduring learning is not is not really what the lecture is necessarily meant for. You have to engage to start to process that information. But I do agree with your sentiment totally. And I absolutely am not saying that you should get rid of lecture or the lecturing experience at all. And that should be one of the tools that is in your toolbox as an educator. But if that's all you got, that's where I personally believe it's problematic. Yeah.
So I just want to reiterate the point that, so I teach one of the most traditional courses, which is European history. Like, I've only ever learned that through lecture format.
Yeah.
Or even my master's program in European history. We have online discussions, but it requires 2 hours of reading every night.
Yeah.
I cannot give my kids 2 hours of reading every night. And so a lot of this makes me feel like I'm still stuck between a rock and a hard place, like echoing the sentiments of my other colleagues in social studies. So I guess one request I would have is if we can hear, success stories from someone with a social studies and humanities background with this approach, because I do feel that lecture has value, especially in the days of like 2-second attention spans. Like these things have created really short attention spans, not for students but for ourselves. And so I'm still really struggling to adopt, to embrace this, right? I can adapt, but at this point, I can't give up lecturing to my students because I can't assign the amount of homework required to have successful discussions. So I'm still really struggling with that. I've been teaching for almost 10 years, right? I'm not a new teacher. The second thing is, you mentioned the decline of APs, which we've been hearing about. And some have said that maybe the move now is going to be towards dual enrollment. Do you have any insight or opinion on dual enrollment classes being offered to high school students, possibly as a replacement to APs?
Let me talk about that dual enrollment thing first, and then I'll come. So there's a push-pull tension going on at higher ed right now, and it's between the universities and the Higher Learning Commission, who does accreditation. The universities want to do dual enrollment. The Higher Learning Commission is saying if you're going to do that, then the people who teach the dual enrollment have to be a certain credential. To have certain credentials, okay? So in other words, what some institutions were doing is they were having high school teachers teach these dual enrollment courses at their high school and get university credit, right? As a way and this is just the reality, where that high school teacher had a bachelor's degree and didn't have a master's or PhD. And if you don't have a PhD in a field at this point, the Higher Learning Commission wants a justification for why you're teaching that course in higher ed. That's kind of where it's at right now. So there's a tension here, but I do think it's coming. Okay. And I do think that in particular schools like this may, in the next 5 years or so, be piloting more of that kind of stuff. That's more interesting to me than the AP sort of thing. So I think there is a future there for sure. Coming back to your first comment, I am a total novice. I don't know anything about European history. I couldn't even name the capital. I know nothing. Okay, so, all right, yeah, thank you. The capital of European history. But for sure, I was almost a history major as an undergraduate. But for sure, I could be wrong here, but I would claim that history is not just a bunch of information that you memorize. For sure. For sure, there must be ideas or ways of thinking that I could call historical thinking that is a tool, intellectual tool used to understand and make sense and integrate different events and different ideas that connect to broader themes that might transcend beyond European history to global history and humanity. Given that assumption that I'm working on, for sure I would think that you would want to have that the best way for students to explore that would be to engage in discussion, debate with each other. So therefore, I would then think that there's no way you could have a class where all you do is lecture without taking time to have students do that. And I would say that the challenge you're facing is you come from a tradition of this is how it's done, and it's this thing of I would like to see an example, and I think that's a great point, of how could this look different than what I have been exposed to. I can definitely, I can definitely help to provide you with that, or to have you see people who teach at the University of Arizona who do this. But because I absolutely, and by the way, that book, James Lang, that's a book that you should read for sure, because he addresses this a little bit, because he's a humanist. And you're absolutely right that in the the sciences, I have to pick on my own discipline for a moment, because the sciences, we lectured physics and chemistry and stuff like that, and of course, at that point we realized no one's learning anything, all these, okay, well, we just weed them out because it's too hard. And then we suddenly changed and asked our students to engage in the construction of thinking right there, and suddenly it all got better. We're like, see, obviously we figured out how to teach. And I've had my colleagues in humanities go, we've been doing that for a while, whatever. But there are certain traditions, and history is definitely one, where it's just so rooted in this way of doing it. But for sure, I got to believe that engaging your students would have value to those things that I think your discipline is about. Unless you're just teaching, memorizing this date and this event and this date, and I know that's not what you're doing, right? But I hear you. I hear you, and I think this is and I think that the solution here is to get rid of the hard place and the rock. Get rid of both of those. Imagine this is a thought experiment. Imagine you could do whatever you want, and you could teach whatever you want in your class. You had no expectation to teach anything. It was European history, but you could do whatever you want. You would probably wake up and go, I'm not going to lecture this week. I've got this role-playing thing I'm going to do. We're going to take this event. They're going to read this thing. You're going to be this person. You're going to be. We're going to act it out. We're going to talk about the implications of this. We're going to have a discussion based on this. You're going to simulate. You would suddenly just blow it up, right? So, I don't know. Yeah. That's what you should hear the community college instructors talk to you. You guys are shackled. They're like straitjacketed, because they have these huge responsibilities to feed students at the university. And so in California in particular, when I've been out there talking, oh my gosh, they live in a prison, an academic prison, because they have to cover this, they must do this. And so the system forces them to, and to work with them is challenging. But there are people who are figuring it out. You have to sometimes put things onto your students a little bit. You need to know these dates. I'm not going to sit up here and lecture this stuff. Here's some stuff. Know this. We're going to come to class and we're going to talk about why you should know this. All right, thanks. Have a great day.